Good day, everyone. My name is Paul Kurchina with the Enterprise Architect SAP community, and thanks for joining us for our webcast. We'll just wait another minute or two before we start. We've had over 200 people sign up for today's webcast, and so glad you can join us. And if you get a chance, drop in the chat where you're joining us from today. We truly have a global audience of people signing in. I recognize a number of old friends on the call as well from different parts of the world: Spain, South Africa, Oklahoma City, Canada. I gotta love Canada. Frankfurt, Germany, the Netherlands, um, Palo Alto, San Ramon. Quite a good group. Newtown Square, Boston, Philippines as well. We've got some people. I think Philippines. I think you're probably rather late or early. I can't remember the difference, but thank you for taking the time to join us today. Chicago. Okay, a few people joining. Okay, so what we'll do is, I think, actually, I know we'll get ready. Thanks again for joining us, everyone, and welcome to our Enterprise Architect SAP Community webcast. We periodically do these webcasts for overall enterprise architecture community. I encourage you to follow our LinkedIn group, search for Enterprise Architect SAP Community to join us. That is a channel on LinkedIn where we use for frequent updates. Also, I want to highlight, just announced this past weekend, our next Enterprise Architect Forum, Next Generation SAP Enterprise Architect Forum in Newtown Square, which will be the February 24th to 27th. It's now become an annual event, our flagship event for kicking off the year. And at that event, it ties back to this webcast as well. We just don't talk about technology, but we talk about skills and career development. So very pleased to welcome both Oliver and Sharm to join us. Friends of mine who I've been talking about this subject on architect skills and career development over quite a few years now, and quite excited about what they'll share today, and really inspired by also the theme, transform yourself to transform the enterprise. So much talk, and many of you from the SAP side, on transformation, everything. So we cannot expect everything to transform, but we also have to transform ourselves. The two kind of go hand in hand. So on that note, I'll turn things over to Oliver and Sharm, and feel free, folks, to drop questions inside the chat as we're going through today's call. Oliver, let me turn things over to you.
Sure. Maybe you introduce yourself quickly, and then I will take us away with the next chapter. Sharm, you're on mute. I think you're still on mute.
Still on mute.
Okay, sorry guys. Yep, thanks Oliver. I was waiting for your introduction. So thank you to Paul for hosting this career webcast, and thanks to everyone for attending this session. It's about a Henley Business School research project. So let me tell you a little bit about Business School. We have 100,000 alumni from 165 countries, so glad to hear it's global audience that we have today. And our focus is very much on developing leaders, applying their learning to make a real difference, not just to the companies, but to society as a whole. Obviously, as Paul highlighted, it's about transforming the enterprise. And I spent 15 years as a CIO in 3 different companies, global leaders, basically transforming, doing business and IT transformations. And then I've spent 15 years at Henley Business School running programs, education programs, working with corporates, working with consultancies and individuals to help them transform themselves. So that's 30 years experience. And we're asking you today really to, if you haven't already done so, to complete a survey, which will take less than 30 minutes. And that's really about helping you. It's about helping the community, and it's about building a body of knowledge. And so in my 2 sessions, I will introduce you to really why we developed this new survey, how it links back to the current body of knowledge, and what we've learned from the initial results that we've got. So back to you, Oliver.
Thank you, Sharm, and thank you, Paul. So I'm Oliver. I've spent the last 20 years with McKinsey, left McKinsey beginning of this year as a partner. I led the global enterprise architecture practice of McKinsey, and over the two decades there, I've been doing a lot of transformations from introducing enterprise architecture basically from scratch, overrunning SAP transformations, overrunning post-merger integrations, and doing that pretty much across all industries. So this year I decided to found my own company, a small startup, very much focused on developing an AI solution for happiness. Not today's topic, but always happy to chat about that another day. I'm a visiting fellow at Henley, and together with Sharm, I'm driving a lot of the research we're going to present to you today. And shameless plug on the next slide. I'm also in the process of summarizing a few of the things I learned on enterprise architecture over the last years in a book. At the moment, it's mainly a blog, but I would invite all of you to subscribe to the newsletter, to come to the blog, and maybe also share your thoughts. So with that, enough advertisement. Let's jump into the juicy content. So I will first start to talk about the enterprise level, because this is where the existing survey, which is a more than 6-year-long collaboration between McKinsey and Henley Business School, founded by Sharm and myself when I was still with McKinsey. It's a database with more than 350 participants, and 350 participants means 350 companies. So here we are looking at the company level, and I would like to use that as an introduction and also as an explanation why we now came up with a new survey where in the second part of my talk, I will share some first findings and some really exciting data, what success factors are actually critical for your career and your job. So what makes enterprise architecture successful? It's actually pretty simple. So first of all, people need to know you, which means you need to get involved. And ideally, you need to get involved early and not only after the RFP has already been signed and the system integrator is knocking on the door. Then you need to get the conversations with the right people, ideally relatively high in the hierarchy. And you need to be involved in shaping the future of the enterprise. So all those things are really backed up by data. So when we look at that chart here for the first step, what's the role of enterprise architecture in the company? I would like to highlight that lower third. In 33% of all companies, of all the participants, the rest of the company doesn't know that enterprise architecture even exists. And that for me was one of the most shocking numbers in the entire survey. And then we were running some analytics, and I mean, all the effects on the right-hand side are statistically significant on the 5% level. So it means, I mean, if people don't know you, they don't talk to you, they don't care about you. So that means that actually your business architecture is not as mature as in your peers. That also means that you don't have really the driving force to change things on the IT side. So you do not really sunset applications. You really are struggling to force people to follow your guidelines. So it's important that people know you. I think it's trivial, but looking at that number, it's only the case for 2/3 of the participants. And if you look at that upper third here, then that actually is a group where people say, yeah, EA exists, but it's not that we are successful because of enterprise architecture, but despite enterprise architecture. So, I mean, also that's maybe not the most positive notion. So the next thing is you should talk to the CXO level. And again, we have very clear evidence that the more you talk to the leadership team of the company, the more likely you're going to follow up with benefits, which is a massive driver of project success. It is much better in driving sustainable business solutions and a lot of other factors. Yeah, so it's important that you talk to the CFO, the CIO, the CEO, and really align with them on the strategy, which is the third thing that we find people on average spend a third of their time in strategic planning. And that's good because we can again show with data that if you do not spend enough time on strategic planning, you don't know where to go. You don't have a clearly defined goal and objective. And then that means you have a slower time to market. That means that you have not so much engagement with the CXO level. You, again, not monitoring benefits. So, I mean, those three factors are, in a nutshell, super damn important. But if we now break it down, we basically talk about the marketing funnel. Yeah, you need to create awareness in the company. Then you need to create engagement with the CXO level. And then you need to move them to action to basically drive together with you the strategy. And if we talk about this marketing funnel, I mean, it's you as a person who is driving that. And I personally believe that the value of being a mastermind in applying the Zachman framework or TOGAF or anything, or being really deep in integration patterns and being able to list them to 2 a.m. at night if you're woken up, that's not going to help you in this process. I mean, the things that you need in order to drive this process and make architecture successful, it's communication, it's stakeholder engagement, it's problem solving, it's a lot of, so to say, getting engaged with business strategy. And this is, I will then also, after the next slide, hand over to Sharm. This is why we said we need a new framework to capture those skills. I mean, yes, we want to transform the enterprise. And for that, we need to build the core team, those people driving the transformation. We need to build cross-functional teams that are doing the actual work. So integrated agile teams that are driving, I don't know, accounts payable or the new S/4HANA implementation in supply chain, you name it. We need to manage initiatives and operations. We need to be able to drive the portfolio, work with vendors, and be successful there. And then we need to really also set up the strategic transformation, the transformation program, get the budget right, get the funding right, etc. And I mean, for that, we need to transform the architecture. And that means architecture itself in the sense of enterprise architecture, the setup, the governance, the artifacts, the technology landscape, but also the data landscape and the business. So super important. But again, all those things will only work if you only also transform yourself, because it's you, it's the architect, the person who is driving that. It's really your personal development. It's your problem solving. It's your character, and it's your stakeholder engagement that is at the end determining success or failure of that funnel. And Sharm is now going to take you in the next section through a couple of the existing frameworks, and it's going to explain to you why they don't work and why we had to come up with something much, much better. And then I'm really looking forward to share with you a few first results from the survey and how those things are really making a difference for your career. Sharm, with that, handing over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Oliver. Yeah, absolutely. So we can move on to the next slide and we can start to say, what would we expect? You're managing your career. You're looking to EA as a profession to help you determine the roles, the skills, etc. And we didn't start off with the view that this research, the body of knowledge, is not the correct body of knowledge. We took a look at it. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. As Oliver said, maybe we concluded that, yes, we did need a new survey. Let me explain briefly why we came to that conclusion. So what we looked at is say, well, we would expect to see clear guidance in terms of the roles, the goals, the skills, and we'd expect to see a consensus around that from the professional and academic sources. So we looked at some of those. Let's look at the next slide and see what we found. So first of all, going back about 15 years, Forrester did an interesting view on archetypes. And here you can see they were looking at strategy and project versus IT and business. Now, the fact they created 4 different boxes wasn't necessarily that they felt there should be 4 different boxes, but the perception from the business, rest of the business, was that people actually fitted into these individual boxes. Now, I hope most of you would feel, no, that's not how I see myself. I don't see myself positioned in an IT project box or a particular IT strategy box or whatever. We see ourselves as something that can span each of these areas. But what was interesting is that this is how the organization perceived it. And I think when we see the research that Oliver and I did, and we found out, as he said, that a large number of people are still not aware of what enterprise architecture does. And even when they are aware of them, perhaps they view them in a very limited way. So clearly that wasn't going to give us a lot of help there. If we look to some more recent sources, and we look to the current source on the next slide, we look at the Lean IX, there's some interesting roles perspective here in terms of the business architect, enterprise architect, solution architect, and technical architect. And what they've done is, you can see a little bit of the Forrester analysis. There's a mapping by strategy focus and by technology focus. Now, this is my mapping based on the chart that is created by Lean IX, but you can see very clearly the technical architect is seen as someone who has very high on the technology focus, but low on the strategy focus. Now, that implies that the strategy focus is more of a business strategy. So here we have a business architect, we have an enterprise architect as 2 different roles. And if we look on the next slide, we'll see how those roles translate into specific goals. So we'll see that the business architect is seen as someone who's dealing with strategic transformation, business processes, whereas the enterprise architect is more dealing with the landscape and the dependencies, looking at the costs and risks. Now, a few years back, I developed some programs for corporates and consultancies around business and enterprise architecture, and we had a debate about that. Should it be separate roles or should it be one role? And we actually called it business and enterprise architecture, largely because of this type of perspective, that the enterprise architect is sitting there more as a conceptual blueprint person, and the business architect is really out there engaging with the business. I think the message we want to convey, and Oliver's introduced in terms of the previous slides, is that we don't see this sort of distinction in architecture. We want to see someone who is a rounded person, who's as comfortable dealing with the business as they are with the technology, who's as comfortable as dealing with strategy as they are with execution. So let's move on and look at what TOGAF offers in terms of specific skills. TOGAF offers a lot more detail at the skill level, and it goes through a whole range of a really wide range of quite disparate skills. And you can see some of the skills that we were referring to earlier in terms of their personal skills, their architecture skills, their skills around management of the business, etc. And what we can see in the next slide is that TOGAF has actually linked each of those skills to a whole set of different roles. So on the next slide, you'll see we actually connect into architecture board members, we connect into specific architect roles. So that, Oliver, has the next slide come up, or is it just me that can't see it? Hello? Paul?
I think Oliver, let's see, Oliver's frozen for just a bit.
Oh,
just okay. 1 second. That's probably why the slide isn't advancing.
Yeah.
We'll see if Oliver pops back in again. He probably will notice that he's just off.
Okay. Well, look, let me carry on talking. So what you see in the next slide is it's actually linked to each of the roles. So you have from architecture board members to the sponsors to the individual roles around technical data, business, etc., in an IT designer. Now, those of you familiar with that will see that there's some challenges with it, because in that slide it shows that oral communications are actually more important for an architect, an application architect, than they are for a board member or sponsor. So as I saw in one comment on that, good luck trying to explain that to a board member. So the problem with this is a really impressive range of skills, but it's not one that's easily connectable to. So we looked at that, and then beyond that, I actually had a chat with Gen AI and said, okay, well, tell me the skills and capabilities of an architect. And interestingly enough, it came back with some similar skills to this. It came back with two categories of skills. It came back with, if we move on to the next one now, that's the slide that I was talking to you about, the different roles. So if we look at some of what's happened on before we go to Gen AI, let's just look at the academic review. And we can see in terms of this academic review of the EA profession that there's a disconnect here. I mean, just briefly, we can say, if we look at the last two comments, there's a disconnect in terms of strategy and execution, and there's not really the guidance that we would expect in order to help people define their careers. So finally, let's look at the Gen AI side on the next one. And here I took one of the three main Gen AI tools, and I said, well, is the AI profession? And yes, it said it is. I said, well, what skills do you need? And it came back with a set of technical skills and soft skills that was good. But I then said, you've missed out all the business skills. And it came back and said, well, yeah, you're right. And here's a set of business skills. So I asked the question again the next time, and it did come back with all three sets of skills. So I can feel good about at least training up the Gen AI tool to realize that we do need to include business skills as well as technical skills and soft skills. So where does that all take us? I think broadly that takes us into our capability map. And what Oliver and I had done, and this was now looking at the body of knowledge to see, were we just duplicating what was there? And we concluded absolutely not. That what's different about the capability map is it highlights these three areas of transforming yourself, the architecture, and the enterprise. It goes down into specific areas. So within the architecture, broadly, you can see the things you would expect to see in terms of technical data and business within a broad architecture framework. When we get into the enterprise, we're really emphasizing that you need to be able to manage your own core team, and you need to manage the operations and initiatives. But equally, in order to really transform the organization, you have to be good at managing across the organization. That means really strong cross-functional skills. If I want to set up a project team in the past, or more recently, platform teams and product teams, I need to be able to engage a whole range of different people across the organization. And in order to do that, I need the personal skills. And I won't spend too much time on that because Oliver's already highlighted that and explained the need for stakeholder engagement. Particularly in terms of the character and mindset, you need to be fact-based. You need to be able to challenge upwards, which is not a skill that all of us have coming from a technology field. And we need then to be able to deliver, the strategy and the execution. So if we move on from that, we can hook into the actual survey, and that capability map effectively translates into three different areas. So we've got at the top level, we've highlighted the need for the personal architecture and enterprise. That translates into 12 skill groups, and that translates into 40 capabilities. And those 40 capabilities are the basis for the survey that you will complete or have completed. And so let's look at that in a little bit more detail. So you can connect into the survey. Just go back a slide. You can connect in the survey through this link. You can use a QR code. And as you can see from the comments that we've got back from CIOs, they found the survey very much enlightening and something that really can add value, both to CIOs and to architects as a whole. So what I want to do, we did a pilot of the survey at Henley, and we had a range of people. And I just want to share with you some of the results that we got from that pilot. And what I've done here is analyzed it across two dimensions. One dimension is the classic architecture dimension, and the second one is combining the personal and the enterprise leadership type skills, the transformation skills on the other dimensions. And when we look at the respondents there, we can start to see some clusters around that. And it's quite interesting because obviously I knew all these people. They were all in a workshop that I was running. I knew the roles that they had, and I was able to see where these people sat in terms of their profiles. And the ones who were at the lower level of this in terms of personal enterprise and the architecture ones were typically people who are specializing either in IT or business roles. So they were relatively junior people, and they were maybe doing an IT analyst role or a business analyst role. The ones in the middle cluster were typically business IT partner roles, program managers, so people who are, you know, more senior and very much connecting business and IT. And then the one at the top level was actually someone who was actually a chief technology officer, a chief transformation officer, and a chief enterprise architect. So we can see at that level, they really do need this combination of skills. And the one that was a bit of an outlier was the C, was actually an enterprise architect type role. And I want to explore that role in a little bit more detail. And when they completed a survey, it actually translated into these 12 skill areas. And this is a type of analysis that you will receive once you actually complete the survey. And it will highlight for you, obviously, those areas of green, the areas where you have assessed yourself as doing really, you know, good stuff work there. And also those areas that you can improve in terms of the orange and the red areas. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be green in everything. In fact, it's quite difficult to be green in everything. A lot will depend on what role you've got. Obviously, we've seen at the top level, if you are at the chief enterprise architect, chief transformation officer role, then we would expect you to be more green in all these, but not if you've got a whole range of other roles. And if we look at this particular profile, we can see someone who's actually strong on the personal side. They're pretty good on the architecture side, but less good in terms of the actually making a difference in terms of transforming the organization. And so we can start to look at that, those last two areas, particularly in terms of cross-functional teams and actually transform the organization. We can look at that and look at the whole capability map on the next slide. And here we can now do a deeper dive and see, well, where are the specific areas that this person could improve if they really wanted to make a bigger difference in transforming the enterprise. And we can see that, for example, the execution element of the transformation is something that's been missing. And that, again, is not surprising if we look at all the previous research that we examined. And one area that we've found right across the board that's maybe not as strong is data. And that data is typically has been something that's a slightly reduced capability. And in this particular area, it's data operations and analytics. So I hope you can see that at the capability level, you can absolutely analyze where you're strong at, where you can improve. So just moving on then to the overall survey and introducing what Oliver's going to be talking about. So the conclusions that we can draw from that is really there really is this need for a new survey. I'm going to leave it at that and move on to the next slide so that Oliver can share with you the analysis. And what Oliver's going to do is take you more into the detail of how do we connect capabilities to performance? Because ultimately, from a career perspective, you want to know how your capabilities are driving your job performance, how they drive in your career progression, and how they drive in the enterprise performance, which is something that we obviously looked at our 5-year survey between McKinsey and Henley. And the new one is now looking at all the other elements of this. So Oliver's going to really bring this to life. And I'm just going to finish off with a quick disclaimer. Oliver's going to introduce a disclaimer. I'll leave you to do that, Oliver. But essentially, what we're saying here, this is very much a work in progress, research in progress project for Henley that we're asking you to contribute to. So this data will change. What Oliver's going to present, what I'm going to present, will change as we build up a critical mass of respondents. So I'll leave you with a thank you for helping us do that and increasing the number of data points that we have. Over to you, Oliver.
Thank you, Sharm.
Just one thing in terms, just a reminder for folks, and I'm going to drop in the chat as a reminder a link to the survey. I mean, people will later on this year that fill in it will get their own personalized results.
Exactly.
And all of that, and I were just talking through. I'm not sure many people in the call have heard of strength finders. I was joking that's almost like a strength finders for enterprise architects.
Yeah. Exactly. So, and that links very nicely to the two chapters I'm going to introduce now. So the first one is we just look what makes you different. So, and again, fully data driven with all the caveats that Sharm just mentioned, that's work in progress. Yeah, so it's going to be a bit of an agile, iterative research approach. You will now see results based on the first 60, 70-ish participants. That might change later on when more people participate, maybe from other geographies, other cultural backgrounds. But this is really for you to engage in the discussion. So what is different? Let me start with what is not different, and that's business and IT. I mean, calling enterprise architects business or IT oriented, that's like calling Formula One drivers being left wheel or right wheel oriented. Yeah, I mean, that's simply impossible. And that's also clearly what we see at the data. So you see here an average of the business skill categories on the x-axis and an average of the IT categories on the skill categories on the y-axis. And you see either you're early in your career or you're coming from a different angle. That's for 30% roughly of the participants. Then you are low in both dimensions. Yeah. So or that's the case for 41% of the participants, you are high in both dimensions. And only a third falls into one of those categories, high in one and low in the other. And I mean, also from a practical point of view, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, you can't run a transformation by being purely IT or purely business focused. So what we did is we now just looked at this data with statistical analysis and said, what are the things that are separating the participants the most? So where do we have the biggest relative difference between the first and the third quartile? And there are a lot of things that you might expect. Yeah, people got more or less promotions or more or less experience in master data management. But really the top two are how much time did you spend in architecture and how much time did you spend in transformation? So from a purely statistical point of view, those are the two things that set you apart the most. And importantly, this is in relative terms. So that doesn't mean, yeah, there are old guys like me or even older guys like Sharm who spend a lot of time in architecture. No, we are talking about the relative portion of your career that you have been focused on architecture or transformation. And that is also what then makes it possible to basically take this data and slice it into those four quadrants. And you see that there are a lot of people in the lower left. There are quite a lot of people in the upper right and a few people in the area that is the upper left focused on transformation and lower right focused on architecture. So the obvious next question is, what is the commonality of those people? So if you want to set yourself apart by either focusing on architecture or focusing on transformation, what are the things that you should look out for? And that's basically what we look at now on the next slides. So the architecture skills are very heavy on architecture. Well, that's no big surprise. Yeah. So, but it's interesting that actually the more important things are governance and professional engagement. The artifacts and the overall value generation are less important. And then you see It's important that you're able to deliver stuff up to targets. It's important that you're able to communicate, that you solve problems. You need to have a good understanding of the tech landscape, a good architecture and data governance understanding, and you have to be able to manage talent and the transformation itself. The transformation skill portfolio looks a little different. And that is in particular interesting if we flip a little bit back and forth. You will realize that the transformation archetype is much heavier on problem definition. They are much better in setting the objective and the setup of a transformation. They are much more heavy on the data strategy side. They are much more heavy on all the things that you need to get right in the beginning, in a nutshell. And I think that is really how I also, from my personal experience, would take those two skill sets apart. So you have on the one hand side a transformation archetype where everybody who ever was in a SAP transformation setup, if you set it up wrong in the beginning, then this thing is doomed to fail no matter how well you execute it. Then you can just execute it faster to run out of budget. So really the transformation part is really getting it right. And then the architecture part is executing it right. And I think that is really an important message for a lot of people in the architecture community. Architecture is as much about execution as it is about planning. And I've seen a lot of situations where the architect delivered that nice blueprint on A2, A1, whatever paper, and said, so now I'm done. Now you guys in operations and developers, please take over. No, then the actual work begins. So I think that for me was a very nice kind of difference between how do you run in transformation and how do you run in architecture. But again, that chapter was only, so to say, the warm-up, because so far we only thought about what makes you different, not what makes you successful. And that is now the final chapter. And I will also try to push us through that chapter relatively quickly so that we have a bit of time for questions and answers in the end. So please feel free to put stuff in the chat, and we will try to come to that in the end. So what is the difference between doing a good job and advancing in your career? So we defined, and that is now based on academic literature, based on personal experience, but you can certainly debate the weightings and how you put that together. So we said you're doing a good job if you're accountable for important decisions, if you're getting good reviews, good feedback, either formal or informal, if you are very close and interacting frequently with important stakeholders, if you're well known, if you get promoted and that kind of stuff. So everybody would say, yeah, that person is a very well-performing, good citizen of the enterprise. And you're advancing in your career right quickly. I mean, if more people report into you in a lot of companies, that's unfortunately still a sign of you being an important person if you have more underlings to control, which sometimes is a real pity for enterprise architecture. Topic for a different talk, a different day. But then you have people reporting relatively early to you. So you would make career quickly if you have your first small team after 3 years compared to having your first direct reports after 8 years. You're higher up in the hierarchy, you're closer to the CEO, and overall you get promoted more quickly, and you're on a subjective level happy with your career. So good news is those two are correlated. So we do find that if you do a good job, you actually also advance in your career. But it's also important to note on that chart that we do have quite a few outliers on the upside. So it seems that you can do a good job and have an outrageous good career if you get some things right. And that is also something we want to come to in a minute, because I mean, obviously, in most cases, career is also somehow linked to money, and we all want to have more money. So trying to find out what's the silver bullet there is definitely also going to be valuable. So this slide now looks at all the skills that we introduced earlier in this capability matrix, and looks at what are the things, what are the top 10 things that are most correlated with job and career index. And those are the things that are in the commonality between the two. So those are 5 things that you will find in as a driver in the job index and in the career index. And that's, I mean, those personally I don't find very surprising. You have to work well on architecture and governance. You have to know the frameworks. You have to be able to manage your portfolio, that it is running projects in time and budget. You have to analyze business implications and work with stakeholders. So I would call that is, so to say, the set of hygiene factors and no surprise things that you need to get right in order to be successful, be it now in your job or in your career and enterprise architecture. It's getting a bit more interesting if we now look at those factors that show up as highly correlated with either job or career, but don't show in the other index. And this is what you see here for job performance. So first of all, you're doing a good job if you're coaching and mentoring. That's no surprise, because I do think, I mean, at the end, everybody will come to a point in his or her career where it's no longer going to be depending on you, but it's going to depend on the people you work with, on how you put together your team, how you have people that you can trust in your team, and that this team is doing a good job, and then you are doing a good job. And then we have a bunch of things that are all very kind of specific and sometimes a bit nichey. Yeah, so Sharm already pointed out, it's a weak spot to bring data strategy to operations. So if you're good at that, you're doing a good job and people are happy with your job performance. If you have a pragmatic, silent approach to make compliance happy without stalling the rest of the company, people like it. Yeah, if you are able to set up master data governance, yeah, that's like juggling with 8 balls. That's super complicated. It's good when you can do that. But it's also, I mean, a lot of those things, people outside of IT don't even understand. And that's also probably why they didn't made it in our top chart in the career index. Yeah, to say what's actually the value of a master data governance. I mean, we all know that, but explain that to a stakeholder, to outside IT, to justify that increase in salary, etc. It's tricky. And now we come, I think, to my personal favorite chart of the entire presentation. What are the factors that are driving the career? And here, I mean, the first one is maybe of no surprise. You need a consistent self-assessment of your strength. So you need to have a good understanding of where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are, and you need to understand where to put your bets, if I put it that way. Yeah, so I mean, in particular, if an opportunity comes your way, hey, do you want to lead this and that transformation project? Do you want to take an additional responsibility for data integration or what have you? You need to be prepared for that, to have the right judgment. Do I want that, or is that something I should rather avoid? And then basically, all the other four factors mean nothing to architecture specific things. They just mean you're damn smart and very good in solving problems. You're very good in solving hard problems. So obviously solving complex enterprise problems directly talks to that. Then it is a career accelerator if you're known to making unbiased decisions. So that means that you don't agree with the person highest up in the hierarchy. That means you don't agree with the person shouting the loudest or being the scariest, but you're really objective and you're driving the decision. Even if that, and that's the next point, even if that means you're challenging senior people, which intuitively a lot of people might think might be counterproductive to your career. And then you're good at generating creative options. And this very much fits to how I've seen a lot of very successful careers starting in IT. Because in IT, a lot of the progressions that are in particular those outliers on the career index axis that we've seen before, they are not progressing slowly, but they are a stepwise function. That means we now have to introduce a new warehouse system. Who is going to be the overall lead for that project? Or we have to transform IT completely. Who is going to pick up the lead for that thing? Or at the lower level, who is going to lead the effort to introduce API management in this and that project? So it's usually a kind of call for action. And then you're not looking for the person who is good at integration. You're not looking for the person who is good at, I don't know, master data management. You're looking for a person you can trust. You're looking for a person that can solve all the unknown unknowns that definitely will happen in the course of that project. And you're looking for someone who, if I'm the CIO, who I can trust that that person is able to also go head to head with the head of HR or the CFO or someone else, so that I don't get problems because that person agrees to something that I wouldn't feel comfortable about. So it's really that skill set that I personally also seen a lot of times being a key career booster, because this is the skill set that gets you in the driver's seat for leading the SAP transformation. Then after leading the SAP transformation successfully, they need someone who takes over the newly created SAP Competence Center with 200-300 people. And if you do that successfully, then you're a clearly likely position to become the next CIO. So I think really building a career based on the fact that you are creative, you're smart, you have a strong character, and you're able to push against more senior people, that's also a good message for a lot of people who might come from a completely different background, who might come from finance, or who come from product management, or who come from a completely different angle to enterprise architecture. Yes, you need to, and that's now the final slide, yes, you need to start with the foundations, but then there is this problem solver angle to enterprise architecture that I think can be hugely successful. And with that, I would now go over to the Q&A part so that we still have a good 10 minutes to ask any questions. If we don't come to answering any of those questions, I mean, also feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn to have a follow-up chat there if we don't succeed now in the next 10 minutes to go through everything.
So Oliver, just about pulling the first question, you've time to work in one more book plug in terms of about what you and Sharm are developing for next year. That's my question. Could you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the skill survey now points to a lot of challenges, but I also want to point to solutions. And that's what I started now with a couple of posts and articles, and what will hopefully develop into a book, basically codifying a set of recipes to say, if you want to develop what we just discussed, if you want to develop that problem solver profile, what are some of the things, what are some of the tactics, what are some of the strategies that I personally have used, what are the things that I've seen working well, and I would love to share those ideas with a broader audience.
Great. So let me take some questions. And just one question came in. Yes, I'll be sending out the link to the slides and the recording and the links to all you folks as well. So that'll be coming. So question here, Oliver and Sharm. I see many EA roles are sole contributors reporting directly to CTO, CIO, head of applications. My observation is architect practice is quite lean team in many organizations. How to change that perception to build and expand the architecture practices in organizations with a right size team instead of placing architects any random place in the org hierarchy.
Good. So maybe let me start because I actually do have a data-driven answer to that. So it's if we look at the data from the first survey, so data-wise, it's fine if you are reporting to CEO -1 or CEO -2. We see a sharp decline, in particular in business alignment, if you report into CEO -3 or below, because that's then usually a more technical role. Yeah, so that, I mean, CEO -1 usually means you report into the no, sorry, CEO -1 means you're directly reporting into CEO, and CEO -2 means you're usually reporting into the CIO. So those two are fine. As soon as you are hidden under a head of application development, you will see that the business IT alignment goes down, and a lot of the other success indicators are no longer present. And that's something so where at least we have the data to show that it's more effective to be higher up in the hierarchy. The other thing in terms of size, size does not matter in enterprise architecture, team size at least. We don't see, we actually do see rather negative effects. And some of them are, by the way, in one of the blog posts also described in detail. Rather negative effects if your team is getting too big. So it's really rather about having the right quality of people, having the possibility to pay them the necessary salary, which frankly is sometimes a challenge, and then rather have 5 really excellent people than 50 mediocre ones.
Great, thank you. Next question. What is the best?
Let me just
go ahead, Sharm.
build
Sorry.
on that a little bit. Yeah. So in terms of the career, I think the most important thing is what's your ambition, and do you have the confidence to match that ambition? And in terms of the, we train and educate a lot of people at Henley, and the biggest thing I've seen is that do they have the ambition to go out and really make a difference in the organization? And what we do, and I think this is something that works on our education programs. I'm not going to say it's going to work for you. You're going to have to look at your own organizations. But what works for us is when they're doing an assignment that is really about changing the architecture matched to the strategy, they go out and they talk to a whole range of different stakeholders. Now, the advantage of doing it with an education program is, of course, they don't have to, play the political games. They can say, yep, I'm doing this as an assignment, but can I ask you about this? Can I ask you about the strategy? Can I ask you about how the architecture fits to this? And in doing that, they start to expand their sphere of influence. They start to build connects to different stakeholders, and then they can start to move more into a business-oriented, a business-driven architecture. So what I would encourage you to do, you can, if you've got an education program anywhere, use it very much practically to determine the ambition that you want. And if you haven't, then find a project where you can do that. And just a final comment in terms of what Oliver commented in terms of, obviously getting people on board. One of the evidence-based bits from our survey that we did is that people are very much driven by stimulating activities. So what you need to do in terms of getting the best people on board is not just about paying them more money. It's about providing an environment where they can make a difference. And that really translates to the first point I made. Build your relationships with the stakeholders, determine your ambition. Do not lose confidence. You are smart enough, you're good enough, and if you take on board the advice that Oliver gave you about the unbiased challenging upwards, if you take that on board, you will start to see how powerful you can be in your organization.
Great, thank you. Next question is let me see here. what are the best ways to do this, do the self-assessment? I think the
Take
survey,
a
right?
survey.
I mean,
Yes, absolutely.
That's a good one.
to do a
Quick
self-assessment,
answer there.
you got to invest the time. It's about
Yeah.
30 minutes, and friends of mine that taken the survey have said going through the survey also really made them think as it went through because of the questions they were being asked. So, any other commentary?
No, I think that's exactly. Go take the survey. You will get a personalized report that is a perfect starting point for your self-assessment journey. There's one question about how do you apply those skills in a consulting environment, and how do you build trust quickly? My quick answer to that is don't bullshit around and stick to your commitments. Yeah, so and I think that is easier said than done. So I can say for myself, I've never broken any commitment. And sometimes that's really painful. And I've always told everybody the same story. And I've told them the story in very blunt, direct terms. So I'm an IT nerd, I'm German. So if you compound all those things, then usually I tend to be a very direct person. And that is how I've built trust with most of my clients, that the project lead hears the same story as the CIO, as the CFO, as the CEO. And I think that is really what you need to get right in order to build trust. And that comes back to that character and mindset piece we talked about earlier.
Oliver, one last question, and for folks that didn't answer it in terms of basically, we'll get contact details to further ask. But seeing as we're an enterprise architect SAP community, I've got in favor of the last question vis-a-vis SAP. Looking at the points of being an EA, what's the biggest challenge for us right now as quote SAP EAs? Oliver, you've got a lot of experience from an SAP side, given your former background and know where things are headed. Some commentary on that.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of challenges involved in that. And I would say, first of all, you should see yourself as an enterprise architect in the first place who also has experience with SAP, because I mean, I'm very skeptical about that approach that you say, I have a hammer, and that hammer is now called SAP, and I'm going to hammer in all the screws with it, no matter how difficult it is. And I mean, at the end, that's not good for SAP, that's not good for you, and that's not good for the organization you're working with. Yeah? And I think sometimes it really requires you to challenge is that over customized SAP monster that has been created for the last 2 decades, is that the right solution for every bit and piece of that landscape? Or wouldn't it be better to really slice it into 5 pieces, and maybe 4 of them are still with SAP, a 5th one is being implemented in-house or with a different vendor, or you name it. But really, so to say, getting a bit rid of that notion that I'm focused on a technology, and therefore this technology is the solution to everything. And I've seen that. I mean, I've seen that on the board level, where people said we need an SAP update, and they then talk about it as it would be an iPhone update being run all over the weekend. No, you need a business transformation, and implementing SAP is part of that. And I think getting that mindset shift in place, that might be the biggest challenge for people in the SAP space right now.
Great. So again, I want to thank everyone for joining us on the call today. And just as a reminder, our community is focused not just on technology, it's the human skills as well. And we've been doing that. We did an event about a month ago where in San Ramon, where most of the focus was on human skills, or at least half of it. And we plan to do the same thing next year at our big event in Newtown Square. So again, Oliver and Sharm, thanks for joining us, and I look forward to you folks joining us in future activities. To quote yourself, you talked about transform enterprise, transform architecture. Well, you got to transform yourself. That's pretty clear. So thanks again, gentlemen, and again, we'll send out all the links to you folks as well. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you all. Take care.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Paul.